Imagine a perfect old map, a clean city, tall towers, canals, market squares, and no slums, no prisons, no hint of dirty work. Now imagine that all this beauty was held up by people whom history did not even consider human. In this video, slaves, debtors, hostages, the dark side of Tartarian human trade. We'll step behind the facade of the legend of perfect Tartaria. On the margins of old maps, tiny symbols next to towers and warehouses, strange notes, obligated soul, sun as collateral, debt without end. In the account books, people stand in the same line as grain and metal. A boy is written down as hostage, his father as debtor for life, crowds as work units by the tower. Later, these squares will vanish from city plans, the market of humans will become a commodity exchange, and the towers will be demolished or labeled unsafe. On paper, it will look as if everyone became free. But where did the slaves, debtors, and hostages themselves go? What if bright Tartaria was an empire where millions of people existed as invisible currency? And that is precisely why they were so carefully erased from history. And most importantly, if you look at our world today, are you sure you wouldn't be written there as someone's debt or someone's hostage? Before we step into the archive, a small request. If you find yourself pausing, even once, to wonder about a symbol, a name, a vanished building, consider subscribing, not for the algorithm, for the questions that won't leave you alone. Now, let us begin where all good investigations begin, with a picture that looks too perfect to be true. The year is 1692. A Dutch cartographer, his name survives only as initials on the bottom margin, finishes inking a city somewhere along the old Silk Road corridors. The paper is thick, expensive, cream-colored with a faint crown watermark that shimmers when he tilts it toward the light. On it, a port city labeled in Latin script as Tartaria Magna. Towers rise in elegant rows. Canals cut through the streets like glass ribbons. Ships pack a harbor lined with warehouses, each one drawn with obsessive care, brick by tiny brick. It is, by any measure, beautiful, the kind of image that makes you want to step inside, to breathe the air of a world that looks cleaner, grander, more orderly than our own. But look closer. Where are the workers unloading those ships? Where are the laborers hauling stone for those towers? The beggars, the sick, the prisoners. Every city in history had them. Every port, every market, every canal district. They appear in Roman mosaics, in medieval woodcuts, in Renaissance street scenes. Here, nothing. The streets are wide and empty. The squares gleam. A few merchants stand near a fountain, their robes immaculate. No dirt, no crowds, no hint of sweat or struggle. It is not a Stasi city. It is a stage set, and on the margins, in ink so small you would need a magnifying glass, a different story begins to surface. Tiny symbols, triangles, chains, letters that repeat S, D, O, next to towers, next to warehouses, next to a building the legend identifies only as Domus Obligatorum, the house of the obligated. A footnote, nearly illegible, offers a translation. Persons held as surety, debt, or service. Slaves, debtors, hostages. They were not forgotten from this map. They were hidden in plain sight, reduced to symbols, pushed into the margins, stripped of faces and names. The official legend lists commodities, silk, spices, amber, iron. It does not list people, yet the symbols cluster. Around the tallest tower, 7 triangles. Near the central warehouse, a row of chains. Beside the canal depot, the letters SDO repeated 4 times. If you count them, and someone eventually did, the symbols outnumber the merchants by 3 to 1. A curious ratio. Modern archivists who have examined surviving copies of this map note another detail. In at least 2 versions, the marginal symbols have been scratched out. Not erased cleanly, scraped as if in haste, leaving pale scars on the paper. Someone wanted them gone, but ink soaks deep. Under ultraviolet light, the shapes return. Triangles, chains, letters. A code for people who were never meant to be seen. The cartographer, whoever he was, drew a perfect city. He also, perhaps without meaning to, drew its cost. Because every tower needs hands to build it. Every canal needs bodies to dig it. Every gleaming market square needs someone to sweep it clean before the merchants arrive. And if those hands, those bodies, those unseen workers do not appear in the picture, it is not because they did not exist. It is because someone decided they should not be remembered. The map with no poor people is not a mystery of absence. It is a record of erasure. And this is only the first page. The archive sits in a converted monastery. Stone walls, narrow windows. The kind of cold that seeps through wool and settles into bone. It is 1743, and a junior clerk named Fyodor Semyonov has been assigned to inventory the customs house records of a trading post on the eastern frontier, a town that no longer exists under its original name. The work is tedious, dusty folios, faded ink, lists of goods that passed through the depot decades earlier, furs, tallow, dried fish, copper ingots. And then, on page 114 of a water-stained volume, Semyonov stops. The column header reads, Servitia Tartarica, Tartarian service. Below it, in the same neat hand that recorded barrels of salt and bolts of linen, runs a different kind of inventory. Names, ages, origins, lengths of obligation. Dmitri, son of Yakov, 14 years, pledged for father's debt, term until repayment or death. Anna, widow, 31 years. Transferred from Kazan Depot as surety for provincial grain quota. 3 children, names unknown. Acquired as part of Merchant Volkov's estate settlement. People, listed between shipments of iron and crates of amber. The clerk's marginalia, small notes in a different ink, probably added later. Offer the context the main entries avoid. Next to Dmitri's name, assigned to tower maintenance, eastern wing. Next to Anna's, kept in obligated quarters near the bell house. Next to the 3 unnamed children, held as collateral pending resolution of trade dispute with Bukhara merchants. The ledger does not call them slaves. The word never appears. Instead, the language is bureaucratic, careful, almost soothing. Obligated persons, pledged souls, debt workers, surety holdings. But the arithmetic is clear. A man borrows 40 rubles to survive a failed harvest. He cannot repay. His son is taken as collateral, not sold at auction, not branded, simply held until the debt clears. The interest compounds, the debt grows, the son works, the father dies. The son's own children inherit the obligation. 3 generations later, the original 40 rubles has become a permanent claim on a family's bodies. This is not slavery with galleys and whips. There are no crowded ships crossing oceans, no public markets where people stand in chains. It is quieter, more administrative, a system that hides its violence inside contracts and interest rates. And it is vast. The ledger Semyonov found covers a single depot for a single decade. It lists over 600 names. Multiply that by every trading post along the old Tartarian routes, from the Volga to the Irtysh, from the Caspian shores to the Siberian river towns, and the numbers swell. Tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, perhaps more. People who lived, worked, and died inside a structure that recorded them as carefully as it recorded sacks of grain, and erased them just as easily when the books were closed. Semyonov, the junior clerk, made a note of his own in the margin of his inventory report. The old ledgers contain many curious entries regarding persons. I have copied what seemed relevant. The originals are much damaged by damp and may not survive another winter. He was right. By 1760, the depot had been abandoned. By 1800, the monastery archive had flooded twice. By 1900, fewer than a dozen pages of the original customs records remained, and the section on Servitia Tartarica had vanished entirely. Only Semyonov's copies survived, buried in a provincial historical society's collection, unread for 2 centuries. The names on the map had found their voices. But voices without faces remain ghosts. 3 lives, 3 ways to disappear into the margins of a ledger. The first belongs to a boy named Arslan. It is the year 1711, a coastal town on the Caspian shore. The air smells of dried fish and tar. A market. Square opens before a stone tower. One of those elegant structures that appear on the old Tartarian maps, its proportions perfect, its purpose unclear. Arslan is 12. He does not know his father. His mother died of fever when he was 7. He has survived by carrying loads at the docks, sleeping in doorways, stealing when necessary. One morning, a merchant's agent finds him near the harbor. The man is polite. He offers bread. He explains that there is work, good work, steady work, at a depot in the interior, food, shelter, a chance. Arslan agrees. What choice does he have? A few days later, his name appears in a customs ledger. Arslan, no patronymic. Acquired, assigned to tower maintenance, northern sector. Acquired, not hired, not apprenticed. Acquired, like a tool, like a horse, like a length of rope. He will work at the tower for 11 years. He will never be paid. He will never leave. The records do not say when he died or how. They simply stop mentioning him. The second life belongs to a man named Grigory. It is the year 1728. A village in the Ural foothills. The harvest has failed for the second year. Grigory has a wife, 2 daughters, a small plot of land that produces nothing but debt. A merchant from the regional trading house visits. He is sympathetic. He offers a loan, modest, reasonable, to buy seed for the spring planting. The interest is described as standard. The terms are read aloud and sound clear. Grigory signs with a mark. He cannot read. The spring planting fails. The debt doubles. Grigory cannot pay. The merchant returns, still speaking softly, still sounding helpful. He explains that the debt must be honored, but there is a solution. Grigory's eldest daughter, a girl of 15, can work at the merchant's townhouse. Her labor will count against the interest. Not the principal, of course, just the interest. Grigory agrees. He has no real choice. His daughter's name appears in a household inventory 6 months later. Marta, daughter of Grigory, debt worker, term, indefinite. The principal remains unpaid. The interest keeps growing. By the year 1735, Grigory's second daughter has joined her sister. By 1742, Grigory himself has been transferred to a work crew, building a canal near a bell tower 200 kilometers from his village. His land, the original collateral, was sold years earlier. It did not cover the debt. 3 generations later, his great-grandchildren will still carry the obligation. The third life belongs to a child whose name the records do not preserve. It is the year 1719. A provincial governor in a frontier territory has fallen behind on his grain quotas. The central administration is displeased. There are whispers of disloyalty, suspicions of embezzlement. A solution is proposed. The governor's youngest son, a boy of 9, will travel to the capital for education. He will live in comfortable quarters near the administrative complex. He will be well fed, well clothed, well taught. He will also never return home until his father's accounts are settled. The boy is not a slave. He is not a debtor. He is something older, something more elegant in its cruelty. He is a hostage, a living guarantee, a breathing contract, a child whose freedom depends on numbers in a ledger he will never see. The records describe his quarters as adjacent to the residence tower, eastern courtyard. They do not describe his face, his voice, his dreams. They do not need to. He is not a person. He is collateral. 3 lives, 3 categories, 3 ways to own a human being without ever using the word slave. And all 3, the captured boy, the indebted farmer, the hostage child, end up in the same places, near the towers, near the depots, near the structures that gleam on the old maps. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps not. The city plan is dated 1734. It shows a trading hub on the Volga Bend, a place where rivers meet, where caravans rested, where goods from 3 continents changed hands. The paper is brittle now, edges crumbling where archivists have handled it too many times, but the ink remains sharp, black lines on yellowed vellum, streets, canals, warehouses, all rendered with geometric precision. At the center, a large open square. The legend identifies it as Torgovaya Ploshchad, Trade Square. Next to the square, a tower, tall, cylindrical, topped with what appears to be a dome or bell structure. The official description, recorded in a municipal inventory from the same year, calls this place the principal exchange for regional commodities. Commodities. The word appears again and again in the administrative records. Commodities arrived, commodities departed, commodities were assessed, taxed, stored, and transferred. But a German merchant named Heinrich Voss, passing through the same city in 1736, recorded something different in his travel diary. The central square is large and well paved, surrounded by warehouses of good construction. On market days, it fills with a great crowd, not only buyers and sellers of grain and cloth, but also pledged workers, debt servants, and what the locals call tower people. These last are kept in a fenced area near the tall structure and are inspected like cattle before assignment. Inspected like cattle. Voss was not a reformer. He was not shocked. He recorded the scene with the same detachment he used to describe the quality of local beer and the condition of the roads. This was normal, unremarkable, part of how business was done. A French diplomat, traveling the same route 12 years later, confirmed the observation, though his language was more delicate. The square serves multiple functions. Alongside the grain market, there exists a parallel trade in obligated persons, debtors, hostages, and those of unfree status. The transactions are conducted quietly near the eastern wall, away from the main thoroughfare. Quietly. Away from the main thoroughfare. Not hidden, just discreet. The city plan from 1734 shows the square in full, the tower, the warehouses, the fenced area near the eastern wall, marked only with a small symbol that matches the ones on the Dutch cartographer's map from 40 years earlier. A triangle, a chain, the letters SDO. Now examine the city plan from 1789. The square is still there, the warehouses remain, but the tower has changed. The legend now calls it former bell house, structurally compromised, scheduled for removal. And the fenced area near the eastern wall, gone, not demolished, not relocated, simply absent from the drawing as if it had never existed. The new legend identifies the eastern portion of the square as Municipal Garden, planted 1785. A garden, where the tower people once stood waiting to be inspected. By 1812, the tower itself had vanished. A new building, a customs house in the neoclassical style, occupied its footprint. The square had been renamed. The old archives had been transferred to a provincial depot, where a flood would destroy most of them in 1847. Today, if you visit this city, you will find an unremarkable plaza, benches, pigeons, a statue of a 19th century governor. No plaque mentions the fenced area. No marker indicates where the obligated persons once waited. The square did not disappear. It was overwritten, layer by layer, decade by decade, until the original text became illegible, readable only in foreign travelers' diaries, in marginal symbols on crumbling maps, in the silence of archives that should contain more than they do. A market for human beings, disguised as a commodity exchange, and then disguised again as a garden, a customs house, a plaza with pigeons. How many other squares underwent the same transformation? The first map hangs in a university library in Leiden. The second belongs to a private collector in Vienna. The third was photographed in 1923, before the original burned in a warehouse fire in Kazan. 3 maps, 3 cartographers, 3 different decades, 1687, 1721, 1754. 3 cities separated by steppe, mountains, and 2,000 kilometers of caravan roads. And yet, place them side by side, overlay the street grids, trace the positions of towers, squares, and waterways. The pattern emerges like a fingerprint pressed into wax. In each city, a central square adjacent to a tall cylindrical structure. In each city, warehouses arranged in concentric rings around the tower. In each city, a fenced compound near the eastern edge of the square marked with the same marginal symbols, triangles, chains, the letters that by now feel like an old acquaintance. SDO slaves, debtors, obligated. The cities have different names, different rulers, different languages spoken in their markets. One traded in furs and amber, another in silk and dried fruit, the third in horses, leather, and something the records call simply labor units. But the architecture of control was identical. A Belgian Jesuit named Verbiest, traveling through Central Asia in the 1690s, noted the similarity with apparent surprise. The trading towns of this region, though governed by various princes and khans, share a remarkable uniformity of design. The central tower, the surrounding magazines, the quarters for bonded persons. One might think a single architect had drawn them all. A single architect, or a single system. The Jesuit did not pursue the thought. He was more interested in astronomy than economics, but his observation sits in the margin of a letter preserved in a Roman archive, waiting for someone to notice. Modern researchers who have examined these maps, urban historians, architectural analysts, specialists in Eurasian trade networks, note the same anomaly. The towers do not match local building traditions. They appear suddenly in the 16th and 17th centuries, fully formed, as if imported from somewhere else. Their proportions follow ratios that repeat across vast distances. Their placement, always central, always adjacent to the human depots, suggests function, not decoration. What function? The official records are silent. The towers are variously described as bell houses, signal stations, administrative centers, or simply the old structure. But the placement of the human compounds tells a different story. In city after city, the obligated persons were kept close to the towers, not in distant barracks, not in peripheral slums. Close, within sight of the central structure, within earshot of whatever bells or mechanisms operated inside. A practical arrangement? Perhaps. Easier to summon workers when they sleep nearby. Or perhaps something else. A Persian merchant's letter from 1703 mentions a curious detail about one such tower. The great stone house hums at certain hours, and the bonded workers are made to stand in the courtyard when it does. They say it counts them. I do not know what this means. It counts them. A building that hums, workers assembled in its presence, a counting that required no clerk, no ledger, no pen. The letter does not elaborate. The merchant was interested in silk prices, not architecture. But the detail survives. One more fragment in a mosaic that refuses to resolve into a clear picture. 3 cities, 3 maps, the same symbols, the same layout, the same proximity between towers and human cargo. Coincidence explains 1 city. Coincidence does not explain 3, and 3 is only what the surviving maps reveal. How many others followed the same template? How many were redrawn, relabeled, overwritten, their fenced compounds transformed into gardens, their towers demolished as structurally unsafe? The pattern is too consistent to be accident, and too widespread to be local. By the end of the 18th century, something was changing. Laws were passed, reforms announced. The language of liberty began to appear in official documents. But before we celebrate the end of the system, we must ask a harder question. If this was the bright Tartarian trade network, the gleaming towers, the elegant canals, the perfect city plans, whose bodies kept it running? And where did they go when the maps were redrawn? Look again at the maps, not at the towers themselves. We have studied those. Not at the squares. We know what happened there. Look at the rings. Every city plan that survives from the old Tartarian trade routes shows the same arrangement. The tower at the center, the warehouses in the first ring, the merchant quarters in the second, and then, in the third ring, always the third, a dense cluster of small structures with no windows facing outward. The legends call them various things: workhouses, obligated quarters, debtor barracks, service dormitories. The names change, the position does not. A Swedish engineer named Lindqvist, surveying fortifications along the Siberian frontier in 1739, made detailed sketches of 3 trading posts. His notes, preserved in a military archive in Stockholm, include measurements that the original city plans omit. The dormitories in the third ring were built to precise specifications. Each structure, 12 meters by 6. Each room, 4 meters by 3. Each room designed to hold, according to Lindqvist's calculations, between 8 and 12 persons. The arrangements are uniform, he wrote, as if constructed from a single template. The buildings face inward, toward the central tower. The outer walls are thick, with no apertures. The doors are narrow and fitted with external bolts. External bolts, doors that lock from the outside. Lindqvist was an engineer, not a reformer. He noted the details without commentary. Walls, measurements, bolts. But the arithmetic speaks for itself. 3 trading posts, approximately 40 dormitory structures each, 8 to 12 persons per room, at 6 rooms per structure. That is between 120 and 2,880 people. per city, housed in buildings designed to keep them from leaving. Multiply by the dozens of similar posts along the trade routes. The numbers climb into the tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands. A belt of human beings wrapped around every tower, not hidden in distant camps, not exiled to peripheral territories, kept close, kept visible, to the tower, if not to visitors. Why? The official records offer no explanation. The dormitories appear on city plans without commentary, as unremarkable as stables or storage sheds. But a Russian administrative report from 1751 contains a curious phrase. The document concerns labor allocation for a construction project, a new canal connecting two river systems. The report lists materials, costs, timelines, and then, almost as an afterthought, workers to be drawn from the tower belt, as customary. The tower belt, not the workhouses, not the debtor quarters. The tower belt, as if this were a technical term, a standard category, a phrase that required no explanation because everyone already knew what it meant. The term appears nowhere else in the archive. It may have been common speech, never formalized in official documents, or it may have been deliberately excluded from the written record. What survives is the implication. The towers were not merely adjacent to the human compounds. They were the center around which the compounds were organized. The dormitories did not happen to be nearby. They were positioned, deliberately, systematically, within a specific radius. Modern analysts who have overlaid surviving city plans with topographical data note another pattern. The third ring, the belt, consistently falls within 200 to 300 meters of the central tower, closer than the merchant quarters, closer than the administrative buildings, closer than anything except the warehouses themselves. Close enough to walk in minutes, close enough to hear a bell, close enough perhaps to feel a hum through the floorboards. If the Persian merchant's letter was not merely poetry, the towers needed something from the people in the belt, or the people in the belt needed something from the towers. The records do not say which, they only show the geometry, a ring of locked dormitories facing inward, surrounding structures that official histories call decorative, ceremonial, obsolete. The letter is dated June 1724. It bears the seal of a provincial governor in the Kazakh steppe, a man whose name appears in tax records, military dispatches, and one surviving portrait that shows him in formal robes, his expression unreadable. The letter is addressed to his wife. Our son has arrived safely in the capital. He is housed in comfortable quarters near the administrative tower. His tutors speak well of his progress. He is learning languages, mathematics, the protocols of court. He sends his greetings and asks after his sisters. A father's letter. Reassuring. Ordinary. Except for what it does not say. The boy was 9 years old. He did not choose to travel to the capital. He was not invited. He was requested, in language so polite it barely resembled a command, by the central administration as a condition of his father's continued appointment. The request cited educational opportunities unavailable in the provinces. The actual purpose was older than education, older than the Tartarian trade routes, older, perhaps, than written history itself. The boy was a hostage, not chained, not imprisoned, not mistreated, at least not in ways the records acknowledge, simply held, a living guarantee that his father would meet his quotas, pay his taxes, remain loyal to powers he could not see and dared not question. The practice was so common, it barely required explanation. A Qing dynasty manual on frontier administration, translated by Jesuit scholars in the 1690s, describes the system with bureaucratic clarity. When a tribal leader or provincial governor assumes office, it is customary for one or more of his children to reside at the capital. This ensures harmonious relations between the periphery and the center. The children receive education and are treated according to their rank. They return home when their father's service concludes satisfactorily. Satisfactorily. The manual does not define the term. It does not need to. Everyone understood what happened to hostages whose fathers proved unsatisfactory. A Persian chronicle from the same era is more direct. The sons of the Khans are kept near the great tower as pledges of their father's obedience. If a Khan rebels, his son answers for it. If a Khan fails to deliver tribute, his son's comfort diminishes. If a Khan flees, his son does not flee with him. The Great Tower, the phrase appears again. The same structure that anchored the trade squares, the same building surrounded by debtor barracks and workhouses. The hostages were not housed with the laborers. Their quarters were better. Separate buildings, sometimes described as guest residences or educational pavilions. But their location was identical, within the belt, within sight of the tower, within reach. A Russian diplomatic report from 1731 lists the hostages residing in a single administrative center along the Irtysh River. 17 names, sons of tribal leaders, merchant princes, regional governors, ages ranging from 6 to 19, 17 children. One building. The report notes that the building stood adjacent to the residence structure, Western Courtyard. Residence structure, another name for the towers that official records call bells, signal stations, or simply old. Why house hostages there? The report does not explain, but a marginal note, added in different handwriting, offers a hint. The young guests are assembled each morning in the East courtyard when the tower sounds. Attendance is recorded. Attendance, recorded. Each morning, not education, not ceremony, a count. A verification that the collateral remained in place. The hostages were not prisoners in the traditional sense. They attended lessons. They played in courtyards. Some, according to letters that survive, formed friendships with their captors' children. But they could not leave. Their families could not visit without permission. Their futures depended entirely on decisions made by men they would never meet, recorded in ledgers they would never see. They were currency. Living, breathing, learning currency, held in reserve against their father's good behavior. And when the behavior was not good enough, the archives are quieter on that question. A name disappears from a list. A letter stops mentioning a son. A provincial governor is replaced, and no record indicates what happened to the child who guaranteed his loyalty. Silence, the loudest sound in any archive. The contract is small, a single sheet of paper, no larger than a man's hand. The ink has faded to brown. The edges are torn where someone once folded it too many times. It is dated 1697, a village in the southern Urals. The terms are simple. A peasant named Ilya Voronov borrows 12 rubles from a merchant house to purchase seed grain after a failed harvest. The interest rate is standard for the region, 20% per year. The collateral is Ilya's labor and, if necessary, the labor of his household, 12 rubles. At the time, roughly the cost of 2 healthy horses. Ilya signs with a mark, a crooked cross at the bottom of the page. He cannot read the words above it. By 1702, the debt has grown to 29 rubles. Ilya has made payments, small amounts when he could, but the interest outpaces him. The merchant house sends a representative, polite, understanding. The representative explains that Ilya's eldest son, a boy of 11, will accompany him to the regional depot to work off a portion of the interest. Not the principal. Never the principal. Only the interest. The boy's name is Pyotr. He appears in a labor registry 3 months later, assigned to a construction crew reinforcing the foundations of a structure the records call the Old Tower. By 1710, Ilya is dead. The debt passes to his widow. She cannot pay. Her second son, Mikhail, joins his brother at the depot. By 1723, the widow is dead. The remaining debt, now 46 rubles, though no one can explain the arithmetic, transfers to Pyotr, who is now a grown man. Pyotr has a wife, 2 daughters, a son born in the shadow of the tower, where he has worked since childhood. The merchant house sends another representative, still polite, still understanding. Pyotr's son, age 7, is registered as debt apprentice 3rd generation. 3rd generation. The phrase appears in dozens of similar documents from the period, a bureaucratic shorthand for something that had no official name but everyone recognized: hereditary debt. Obligation that outlived the borrower, chains made of paper and interest rates. A Polish traveler passing through the region in 1734 recorded a conversation with a local official. I asked how long a man might remain in debt service. The official laughed and said, as long as his family has children. I thought he was joking. He was not. The ledgers confirm the system's reach. A single depot's records from the 1740s list over 200 families in multi-generational debt. Some entries stretch back 4 generations, great-grandchildren paying for loans their ancestors had taken before anyone living could remember. The original amounts were small, 20 rubles, 15, 8. The accumulated debts were enormous, 300 rubles, 500, sums that could never be repaid through labor alone. And yet, the labor continued, year after year, generation after generation. Because the system was not designed for repayment, it was designed for retention. A workforce that could not leave, that had no legal standing to refuse, that reproduced itself. Each child born into obligation, each marriage creating new debtors, each death transferring the burden to survivors. The contracts did not use the word slavery. They spoke of obligation, service, mutual agreement. But the dormitories locked from the outside, the workers could not travel without permission. The children inherited chains they had never chosen to wear. Some ledgers end abruptly, pages torn out, entries crossed through with heavy ink. Water damage that seems too precise, too convenient, affecting only certain names and certain numbers. Someone, at some point, tried to erase the evidence, but paper remembers. Ink soaks deep. And the pattern, once you learn to see it, appears everywhere. 12 rubles, a crooked cross. A boy sent to the tower. 4 generations later, his descendants were still paying. The date is August 14th, 1762. A trading post on the Tobol River. The summer has been dry. Dust hangs in the air, turning the afternoon light the color of old brass. In the debtor barracks, the third ring, the belt, something is different. The workers have not reported for their morning count. The dormitory doors stand open. The courtyard beside the tower is empty. A clerk named Semyon Baranov, responsible for labor allocation, sends a messenger to investigate. The messenger does not return. By noon, smoke rises from the eastern quarter. The bells in the tower begin to ring. Not the usual sequence, but a continuous clanging, chaotic, almost frantic. By evening, the merchant quarter is barricaded. The administrative offices are burning, and someone, the records do not say who, has broken into the customs archive and begun feeding ledgers to the flames. The official report, written 6 weeks later by a military commander sent to restore order, describes the event in careful language. A disturbance among the bonded workers, caused by outside agitators and seasonal grievances. Order restored within 8 days. Principal instigators executed. Remaining participants reassigned to interior work details. 17 words for 8 days of chaos. But other documents survive. Fragments, margins, letters that were never meant to be preserved. A merchant's wife, writing to her sister in Moscow, offers details the official report omits. The debt workers rose all at once, as if by signal. They broke into the counting houses and burned the contracts. They said they were erasing their chains. The bells rang for hours. No one knows who was ringing them or why. When the soldiers came, many of the workers had already fled into the steppe. Those who remained fought with tools and stones. The square was red for days. Burned the contracts, erasing their chains. The uprising was not random violence, it was targeted. The workers knew exactly what held them. Paper, ink, signatures they had never been able to read. And they knew where that paper was kept. A police report from the aftermath lists the damages. 17 buildings destroyed or severely damaged. The customs archive, total loss, contents unrecoverable. The labor registry, partially salvaged, many pages missing or defaced. The tower itself was untouched. The report notes this with evident relief. The resonant structure sustained no damage, though rioters were observed gathered in its courtyard during the initial hours. Their purpose there is unknown. Their purpose is unknown. Hundreds of people, in the middle of a revolt, gathering in the courtyard of a building they had been forced to face every morning for years. Why? To destroy it? To claim it? Or simply to stand there, finally, without being counted? The report does not speculate. The commander was interested in order, not meaning. What happened to the survivors? The official record lists executions, 17 names, reassignments, over 300 workers transferred to interior details, a phrase that appears nowhere else in the regional archives, interior details, a destination with no location, a punishment with no description. The families of the executed received no notification. The names simply vanished from subsequent registries, and within a year, the maps of the city began to change. The tower is marked as structurally compromised pending assessment. By 1770, it has been removed from city plans entirely. The square where the revolt began is relabeled as a municipal storage yard. The debtor barracks are gone, not demolished according to construction records, but simply no longer drawn. An uprising that lasted 8 days, an archive that burned in hours, and a city that was quietly, methodically rewritten until the revolt became a disturbance. The burning became seasonal grievances, and the people who fought back became names on an execution list, then nothing at all. History does not teach this uprising, because history was redrawn to make sure no one would remember to ask. The order is dated March 3rd, 1784. It bears the seal of the Imperial Building Commission in St. Petersburg. The language is administrative, routine. The structure designated as Signal Tower Number 7, located in the central trading square of name redacted, is hereby condemned as structurally unsound. Demolition to proceed immediately. Materials to be salvaged where practical. Site to be cleared for municipal improvement. Structurally unsound. The tower had stood for over a century. It had survived floods, fires, and at least one armed revolt. Engineers' reports from as recently as 1779 described its foundations as remarkably stable and its masonry as superior to modern construction. 5 years later, condemned, demolished, cleared. The same order, with minor variations in wording, appears in archives across the former Tartarian trade routes: Kazan, Tobolsk, Orenburg, Astrakhan, Semipalatinsk, tower after tower, declared unsafe, torn down, replaced. The timing is not coincidental. In 1762, Peter III issued a manifesto freeing the Russian nobility from compulsory state service. In 1785, Catherine II extended new rights to urban merchants and craftsmen. Throughout the 1780s and 1790s, a wave of administrative reforms swept through the empire, modernizing, rationalizing, replacing the old systems with something that looked, on paper, like progress. The reforms loudly proclaimed new freedoms. They quietly created new categories of control. The same year that Signal Tower Number 7 was demolished, the provincial administration introduced a revised labor code. The code abolished the term debt worker. It replaced it with assigned laborer, a classification that carried the same restrictions, the same hereditary obligations, the same locked dormitories. Different word, same chain. A German legal scholar traveling through the region in 1791 noted the transformation with dry precision. The old visible bondage has been replaced by an invisible one. The towers are gone, but the labor registries remain. The contracts no longer speak of debt, but of service obligations and residential assignments. The people are free on paper. In practice, they cannot leave their designated districts without permission. Free on paper. The phrase echoes through the documents of this era. Manifestos announced liberation. Decrees proclaimed rights. And in the margins, always in the margins, new regulations ensured that the liberated remained exactly where they were. The demolitions served a purpose beyond urban improvement. They erased evidence. A tower surrounded by debtor barracks told a story. A modern customs house surrounded by municipal gardens told a different one. The architecture of control was replaced by the architecture of forgetting. Before and after drawings survive in some provincial archives. The contrast is stark. 1770, a central square with a cylindrical tower, warehouses in concentric rings, the familiar cluster of windowless dormitories facing inward. 1800, the same square, now open. A neoclassical administrative building where the tower stood. Tree-lined promenades where the dormitories once packed human beings ate to a room. Progress, improvement, modernity. And underneath the new paving stones, foundations that engineers' reports describe as anomalously deep and of unknown original purpose. The workers who had lived in the belt did not vanish. They were reclassified, reassigned, dispersed into new categories. State peasants, factory hands, military conscripts. that carried different names but similar restrictions. The hostage houses became educational residences. The debt registries became labor allocation records. The human markets became employment exchanges. The system did not end, it was renamed. And the towers, the structures that had anchored the visible architecture of bondage, were systematically removed, as if their absence could erase what they had witnessed. By 1820, fewer than a dozen of the original towers remained standing across the entire former Tartarian trade network. Most were in remote locations, far from the modernizing gaze of imperial reformers. Those that survived were reclassified as historical monuments, or architectural curiosities, stripped of context, emptied of meaning, preserved as decorations rather than evidence. The theory of a single Tartarian human trade network seems to collapse here. Archives stop, structures fall, survivors scatter into new bureaucratic categories that obscure their origins. Maybe there was never one system. Maybe it was always local, fragmented, unconnected. Maybe history really did win. But erasure is never complete. Stone remembers weight. Ground remembers foundations. And families, scattered, renamed, officially freed, remember stories that no archive contains. The towers are gone. What they built remains. Open a map of any major city along the old Tartarian trade routes. Not a historical map, a modern one. Satellite imagery, street view, the tools we use to navigate the present. Now overlay the old plans, the ones with towers, squares, and rings of dormitories. Watch what happens. In Kazan, a power station sits exactly where a cylindrical tower once stood. The station was built in 1932. Its foundations, according to construction reports, required no new excavation. Workers simply cleared rubble and built on what was already there. Anomalously deep substructure, the engineers noted, origin unknown, suitable for heavy industrial use. In Orenburg, a railway junction occupies the former trading square. The tracks curve around a central building, a switching station, that follows the same footprint as the old merchant warehouses. The surrounding blocks, developed in the 1890s as worker housing, align precisely with the third ring, the belt. In Astrakhan, a district of Soviet-era apartment blocks covers the ground where debtor barracks once stood. The buildings are 5 stories tall, concrete, identical, arranged in rows that face inward, toward a central plaza where nothing stands except a concrete platform. The platform's purpose is unclear. It appears on city plans as memorial site, undesignated. No memorial was ever built. The footprints persist, not metaphorically, literally. The streets curve where old walls curved. The lots divide where old dormitories divided. The infrastructure, pipes, cables, foundations, follows channels that were dug centuries before anyone living can remember. A Ukrainian urban historian named Olena Kovalenko spent 15 years mapping these correspondences. Her research, published in a journal that few people read, documents over 40 cities where modern infrastructure mirrors the old Tartarian layouts. The pattern is consistent, she wrote. Power stations on tower sites, rail yards on market squares, industrial housing on barracks footprints. The cities have been rebuilt many times, but they remember their shapes. Cities remember. The phrase sounds poetic, but Kovalenko meant it technically. Urban development follows paths of least resistance. When builders encounter existing foundations, they use them. When planners design new districts, they follow old street grids. When engineers lay pipes and cables, they run them through channels that already exist. The towers were demolished, the dormitories were cleared, but the ground beneath them was never truly erased. And so, the geometry persists, the rings, the belts, the central void where something important once stood. Modern residents feel it without knowing why. A journalist in Tobolsk, writing a feature about urban decay in 2019, interviewed residents of a housing block near the old river port. The block was built in 1958. It stands on the site of what historical maps call obligated quarters, eastern section. There's something wrong with this building, one resident told her. The floors vibrate at night, not from traffic. There's no traffic here, just a hum, very low, like something underground is running. The journalist included the quote as local color. She did not investigate further. But the complaint is not unique. Residents near former tower sites across the old trade network report similar phenomena: vibrations, low-frequency sounds, electronics that malfunction in specific rooms, animals that refuse to enter certain courtyards. Engineers who have surveyed these sites offer mundane explanations: settling foundations, underground water channels, resonance from nearby industrial equipment, perhaps. Or perhaps the ground remembers what stood there, what hummed, what counted the workers assembled in the courtyard each morning. The towers are gone, their shadows remain, pressed into the street grids, embedded in the foundations, felt in the vibrations that no official report can fully explain. The woman is 73 years old. She lives in a village outside Chelyabinsk, in a wooden house her grandfather built. The walls are thick, the windows are small. The stove in the corner has not changed since before the revolution. Her name is Valentina Dmitrievna. She does not know why a stranger has come to ask about the old times, but she remembers the stories. "My grandmother told me never to go near the stone place by the river," she says. She called it the counting house. She said her mother had been taken there as a girl, taken and counted. Every morning they rang a bell and counted them like sheep. The stone place by the river. On Soviet-era maps, it is marked as ruins, pre-revolutionary, origin unknown. On imperial maps from the 1840s, the same site appears as former signal tower, demolished. Valentina Dmitrievna has never seen these maps. She cannot read the old script. She knows only what her grandmother knew, and her grandmother before that. They said the floor shook when the bell rang. They said you could feel it in your bones. My grandmother's mother worked there for 9 years. She was sent because her father owed money for a horse. A horse, a debt, a girl sent to the counting house. The story matches the pattern in the ledgers. The ones that survived, the ones with water damage and torn pages and entries that stop mid-sentence. But Valentina Dmitrievna has never seen a ledger. Her family kept no documents. What she carries is older than paper. Across the former Tartarian trade routes, similar stories surface when you know how to listen. In Kazakhstan, an elderly herder remembers his grandfather speaking of the tower children, boys taken from nomadic families and kept in stone buildings near trading posts. They were hostages, he says, using a word that does not appear in any official Soviet history. Their fathers had to bring horses, wool, meat. If they did not bring enough, the children stayed longer. In Tatarstan, a retired school teacher recounts a family legend about an ancestor who burned the books. He worked in a customs house, she says. One night, he and others set fire to the records. They wanted to destroy the debts. The soldiers came. He was never seen again. She does not know the date. She does not know the city. But her description, the customs house, the burning records, the soldiers, echoes the fragments that survive from the 1762 uprising on the Tobol. 260 years, no written record in her family, and yet the story persists. This is how memory works when archives fail. It becomes oral, fragmented, distorted by time and retelling. But it survives, passed in kitchens, whispered at funerals, embedded in warnings that children receive without understanding. Don't trust the men from the city. Never sign a paper you cannot read. Stay away from the stone places. The warnings make no sense in the modern world. There are no counting houses now, no debt barracks, no towers that ring bells at dawn, but the families remember, not the facts. Those are lost. The feeling, the knowledge that something happened, something was taken, something was never repaid. A Russian ethnographer named Mikhail Sorokin spent 2 decades collecting these oral histories. His archive, unpublished, stored in boxes in his apartment in Yekaterinburg, contains over 300 interviews from villages and towns across the Urals and western Siberia. The same motifs repeat, he wrote in his notes: towers, bells, counting, debt that passes to children, floors that hum, names erased from books. The details vary, but the structure is identical. Identical, across thousands of kilometers, among families who never met, never communicated, never compared their stories, as if they were all describing the same system, a system that the archives tried to erase, a system that the families refused to forget. Open your browser, search for Tartaria, The images arrive instantly, gleaming domes, towers of impossible height, cities that stretch to the horizon without a single flaw, grand expositions, pristine architecture, a civilization so advanced, so beautiful, so perfect that it must have been hidden from us by a vast conspiracy. The videos have millions of views, the forums have thousands of members. The theory, if it can be called that, has spread across languages and continents, reshaping how a generation understands the past. Tartaria was a global empire. It had free energy. It had technology we cannot replicate. It was peaceful, prosperous, harmonious. And then it was erased, its buildings stolen, its history rewritten, its very name forbidden. The story is seductive. It offers wonder in place of complexity, mystery in place of documentation, a golden age that requires no uncomfortable questions about who built the towers, who dug the canals, who paid the price for all that gleaming stone. Scroll through the images, study the cities. Notice what is missing. No workers, no slums, no prisons, no barracks, no fenced compounds, no locked dormitories facing inward toward structures that hummed. The perfect Tartaria of the internet has no slaves, no debtors, no hostages, no children taken as collateral for their father's loyalty, no families trapped in obligations that lasted generations. It is the map from 1692 all over again, beautiful, geometric, clean, with the marginal symbols carefully erased. The online believers do not erase these people deliberately. They simply do not see them. The theory begins with architecture and ends with architecture. The humans who built it, who served it, who were consumed by it, they are not part of the story. Because a story about free energy is easier than a story about unpaid labor. A story about hidden technology is more exciting than a story about hereditary debt. A story about a perfect empire erased by villains is more satisfying than a story about systems so brutal that even their beneficiaries eventually wanted them forgotten. The soft lie of perfect Tartaria is not malicious. It is nostalgic. It is the same impulse that makes us imagine the past as simpler, cleaner, more meaningful than our own chaotic present. But nostalgia has a cost. When we smooth history into a golden age, the first thing we erase is the people at the bottom. The internet Tartaria has room for grand architects, enlightened rulers, mysterious technologies. It has no room for Arslan, the boy acquired at a harbor and assigned to tower maintenance until he disappeared from the records. No room for Grigory, whose 12-ruble debt consumed 3 generations. No room for the 9-year-old hostage whose letters home were read by administrators before being sent. They do not fit the aesthetic. They complicate the narrative. They make the towers look less like wonders and more like what they were. Machines, systems, engines that ran on human fuel. The believers will say, but look at the beauty. Look at the scale. Surely such magnificence could not have been built by cruelty. History answers, it almost always was. The pyramids, the cathedrals, the railroads, the canals. Every great construction of the ancient and modern world carries the fingerprints of forced labor, debt bondage, or outright slavery. This is not cynicism, it is arithmetic. Magnificence requires bodies. Bodies require control. The online Tartaria is a dream of magnificence without cost, a fantasy where the towers built themselves, where the canals appeared by magic, where an empire spanned continents without ever requiring someone to dig, carry, suffer, or die. It is a beautiful lie, and like all beautiful lies, it survives by making the truth invisible. The truth is messier, darker, harder to love. But the truth has names, faces, families who remember. The truth deserves to be told. It is 2:47 in the morning. A city. Any city, your city. The office towers glow against the dark sky. Blue-white light from 1,000 windows where no one is working, where the screens stay on because the screens always stay on. Below, the streets are quiet. A delivery driver checks his phone. An algorithm has assigned him another route. He cannot refuse. The rating system does not forgive refusals. Somewhere in the suburbs, a woman lies awake calculating student loans, medical bills, the mortgage that seemed reasonable 10 years ago. The interest that grows faster than her payments can shrink it. She will work tomorrow, and the day after, and the year after that. The debt will still be there. This is not Tartaria. There are no towers that hum, no bells that ring at dawn, no ledgers listing human beings between shipments of grain. And yet, the shapes remain. The relationships persist. The arithmetic, if you look at it clearly, is not so different. A worker in a fulfillment center wears a device that tracks her movements. It measures her speed. It calculates her efficiency. If she slows down, the system notices. If she takes too long in the bathroom, the system notices. She is not chained. She can quit. But the rent is due, and the jobs that pay enough are the jobs that track you. Is she free? A young man signs a contract for a technology job in a country where he has no citizenship. The visa is tied to the employer. If he leaves, he must leave the country. If he is fired, he has days to find another sponsor or be deported. His salary is good. His apartment is comfortable. He is not a hostage, but he cannot leave without permission. A family takes a loan to pay for a medical emergency. The interest rate is disclosed in paperwork they sign, but do not fully understand. Within 3 years, the original amount has doubled. They pay and pay. The principal barely moves. Their children will inherit the house. They may also inherit what is owed on it. 3 categories, 3 ways to be held in place. The language has changed. We do not say obligated persons. We say employees, contractors, debtors, migrants. The contracts are digital now, signed with clicks instead of crooked crosses. The tracking is automated, invisible, efficient beyond anything the old customs clerks could have imagined. But the structure is the same. People who cannot leave, people whose labor is measured and extracted, people whose debts grow faster than their ability to repay, people whose presence in a place depends on the goodwill of those who hold their papers. The towers have been replaced by servers. The ledgers have become databases. The counting is continuous now, not once a morning, but every second, every click, every movement tracked and stored. And the belts? The rings of controlled people surrounding the centers of power. Look at the maps of any modern city. The expensive districts in the center. The workers pushed further out, commuting hours each day, their time consumed by the distance between where they can afford to live and where they must go to work. Different architecture, same geometry. We do not call it bondage. We call it opportunity. We call it flexibility. We call it the market. But the question remains, the same question that haunted the old ledgers, the same question that the burning contracts could not answer. If you are free, why can you not leave? If the debt is fair, why does it never end? If the system serves everyone, why do some people appear in it only as numbers, tracked, measured, counted, while others hold the keys? A museum in Tobolsk, 3rd floor, a room that most visitors pass without stopping. In a glass case under soft lighting rests a bell, small, bronze, cracked along one side, the metal split by some ancient trauma. The placard reads, "Signal bell, 18th century, provenance unknown. Donated 1923. That is all. No mention of what it signaled. No mention of who heard it. No mention of the courtyard where workers once assembled, or the hum that rose through the floorboards, or the count that determined who would eat and who would not. The bell is silent now, a curiosity, a decorative object in a room full of decorative objects. But it is here. It survived. A park in Orenburg. Children play on swings. Old men sit on benches watching pigeons. The grass is green in summer, brown in autumn, white in the long winter months. Beneath the grass, foundations. Stones laid 2 centuries ago. Walls that once held 8 people per room. Doors that locked from the outside. The park does not remember. The children do not know. The old men on the benches have heard stories, perhaps, but the stories are fading. And yet, a woman walks through the park every morning. Her name is Isailu. She is 46 years old. Her grandmother told her that their family once lived here, not in this park, but in what stood here before. We were tower people, her grandmother said. We belong to the stone. Isailu does not fully understand what all that means, but she walks through the park anyway. She touches the old trees. She sits on the bench nearest the center, where the maps say a structure once stood. She remembers. A photograph in a kitchen in Yekaterinburg, black and white, faded. A family posed stiffly before a wooden house. Father, mother, 5 children, the youngest held in arms. The photograph is dated 1908. The family name, written on the back in pencil, matches an entry in a customs ledger from 1703. Voronov, the same name, the same region. A line stretching across 165 years, from a 12-ruble debt to a photograph of people who owned their own house, their own land, their own names. The debt ended, eventually. The family survived. The great-great-granddaughter who keeps the photograph does not know about the ledger. She knows only that her family has always lived in this region, that they were poor once, that they endured. She does not know she is proof that the system, for all its power, could not erase everyone. This is what the chains could not take: the capacity to continue, to have children, to tell stories, to walk through parks where barracks once stood and feel, without knowing why, that this ground matters. The system wanted permanent control. It wanted debt that never ended, labor that never ceased, people who existed only as numbers and ledgers and symbols on maps. It failed, not completely, not quickly, not without unimaginable cost, but it failed. The towers fell, the ledgers burned, the categories dissolved into new categories, and those too will eventually dissolve. The geometry of control persists, but it is not eternal. Nothing built by humans is eternal. What endures is smaller, quieter, harder to measure. A grandmother's warning, a name on a photograph, a walk through a park, a bell in a museum that no one stops to see. Maybe there was never one pure Tartarian empire. Maybe the maps lied, the ledgers exaggerated, the travelers misunderstood what they saw. But there were towers, there were markets, there were ledgers, and there were lives, slaves, debtors, hostages, people who were counted like grain and erased like mistakes. If we let them back into the story, if we look past the gleaming domes and the beautiful engravings and the seductive myth of a perfect past, the history becomes harder and much more human. The question is not whether Tartaria existed. The question is whether we are willing to see who paid for it, and whether we are willing to ask who is paying still. If history is written by survivors, who erased the rest? If this story stays with you, if the names, the numbers, the silence in the archives troubles you, then carry it forward, share it, question it. Look at your own city with new eyes, and subscribe, not for the algorithm, for the questions that will not let you sleep.